Go ahead then.
There we go.
Lovely. Yep. Hello and welcome everyone to another meeting of the Funding Impact Working Group. We've got quite a full session today, including a guest speaker who we're very excited to have, namely Andrew Nesbitt from Ecosystems, who's going to be talking about a project. And in the second half of the session, we're also going to conclude our feedback that we started a session or two ago and dig into that a bit more, which will be led by Glenn. And that's the general agenda for today. I can see that I don't think anyone else has added any other agenda items apart from our general plea for someone to do the research slide series on either November 5th or 19th. If anyone's here and thinking about that in the background, please let yourselves be known, perhaps after Andrew's session, which is titled The State of Open Source Software Funding Data. And with that, I think I will hand over to Andrew, who we're very happy to have with us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak. So this, let me work out how to share my screen. How visible is that?
Very visible. Perfect.
Some amount of visible. Excellent. This is a talk that I gave at CHAOSS in Denver. What month was that? August? Was it August? I can't remember. And I only had 15 minutes, so it was basically like an extended lightning talk, and I had to speak at lightning speed, so it's nice to be able to do it slightly slower, slightly more relaxed, but still there's 56 slides of data, so I will still be kind of like shooting through quite quickly, but we hopefully will have some time at the end for questions. So I'll dive right in. This is a talk primarily about data that I have found through mining information from packages in package managers that has been indexed in ecosystems. There'll also be a pop quiz. Dawn or anyone else who attended CHAOSScon is not allowed to participate because it's the same pop quiz as previously. But anyone who has not seen this presentation before may enter the quiz at the end. So pay attention, and there will be a question when we get to the end. My name is Andrew Nesbitt. I'm based in Somerset in England, and I've been working on indexing open source metadata for kind of coming up to 8-9 years now, and interested in many different ways that it can be used to help discover interesting or critical projects, and kind of the many rabbit holes that you can go down once you start looking at pulling on threads of dependency networks and how people are connected within this space, and kind of the power laws that exist in open source ecosystems as well. I also have poodles. This is where most of my presentation time normally is taken up, is just like this massive reel of poodle pictures. Eventually it will cycle. And yeah, so we have 5 poodles now, and they are like a big part of my life, because if you ever try to walk 5 dogs at once, you realize this is very, very slow because you can't synchronize them particularly well. Yes, so ecosystems. This is a project that I've been working on for quite a few years now, and the idea is that it tries to index data about open source projects and open source packages from many different sources, and then tries to connect the dots between them, specifically around dependency networks. And so it's indexing lots and lots of different registries and different source repositories as well, and then mining the dependencies out of those individual things. there's quite a lot of data in it now. 12 million packages, which have what's that, 140 million versions published, which have been downloaded 2.5 trillion times, which is kind of wild. And then the big number there is the dependencies is 24 billion dependency connections. That is basically mining dependencies from those 200 million, nearly 300 million repositories, your package JSONs, your gem files, your every different kind of manifest file you can imagine for each different package manager, and then being able to say, like, these repositories depend on these packages, as well as being able to say what packages those packages depend upon as well. So you have the full kind of transitive dependency tree of data. So that can give you some really interesting insights, and also ways of kind of digging through this massive data set. And today I'm going to focus specifically on which packages have some kind of funding metadata in them. What do I mean by that? So there's three kind of sources of funding metadata that show up in ecosystems data, especially in package manager data. Those things are, some package managers actually have a field, which is like funding URI or funding, which can give a link or multiple links to places where the project or package can receive donations. The owners and maintainers of those projects can also have on their profiles ways of, I realize I have slides for this. My order is the wrong way around. Apologies. Funding YAML files in repositories and packages can contain a number of different funding sources. As I said before, package managers actually have fields where you can declare ways that your project can be funded. These are URLs primarily, in links to Open Collective, GitHub sponsors, and similar kind of funding platforms. And then also profiles of people who own packages, or organizations can belong to GitHub sponsors, or also add their links in their own profile to other places that they can be funded. So those are the three primary sources of places to go looking for actually where there is funding data. And to give you some examples, this is a number of different kinds of places that show up as funding links. So GitHub sponsors, platforms like Ko-Fi and Buy Me a Coffee. Polar doesn't really do it anymore. They've kind of removed that feature from their website, so I should probably remove that line from the slide. But even PayPal, and actual links to donating directly for where the project is owned by an organization. So let's go through some of that data. So of the 12 million packages, I found 435,000 that have at least one funding link, which is approximately 3.6% of all packages. Not massive, but you got to remember that there is a very long tail of packages that aren't necessarily even particularly real. There's a lot of spam. There's a lot of malicious packages that are unlikely to kind of, like, they get published, they never get updated. They're not actually full of real usable code. So let's kind of have a look at how those funding links show up. Again, primarily GitHub sponsors is like the biggest way that most packages are asking for some form of funding. This also kind of highlights the fact that when GitHub sponsors are kind of like nicely integrated into multiple levels of this, where it can show up as like the owner of a repository kind of naturally can give their sponsored link over to every different repository, and then every package that's published from those repositories as well. Whereas all of the other funding platforms are essentially like required to be added to a funding YAML file or directly in the package metadata. But Open Collective showing up as kind of like second is not a surprise, because they've been around in this open source sustainability space for a long time. There's even like, this is the top domains. Syndra has a like, it's actually like reaches up into his one this one maintainer is actually in the top like most used funding domains across all package managers, which is pretty wild. The Then if we look at the breakdown of what kind of like share do we have in each different kind of ecosystem, and when I say ecosystem, I'm breaking them down by essentially the package manager registry, which aligns pretty closely with kind of the language that and the kind of that ecosystem being like either JavaScript or Go or Python or Java. And it has an interesting distribution here, like, but again, when we're looking at the total number of packages in the registry, it can easily be skewed by how much spam and kind of other like noise is happening in the registry. So npm has the most funded packages, but that's only 3% of all packages, because it's like 4 million packages on npm, and most of them are just like random noise that have never really been downloaded and used, as far as I can see. There's also some interesting ones with as you go into some of the smaller registries to see like, oh, actually, like there's a good number here, especially considering that some of these registries are quite old and have been around for a lot longer than, say, GitHub Sponsors and Open Collective. And so they're actually kind of upgrading and keeping up with the latest trends rather than just being kind of like stuck in the past. So rather than look at kind of all the noisy data of millions of packages and saying like, oh, actually, it's not that amazing because, 3% of all packages have funding links, let's have a look at just what I call the critical packages. This is approximately 10,000 of the most used packages across all ecosystems. And when I say most used, this kind of usage metric is where ecosystems kind of comes into its own, because we mine the dependency graphs of all of the kind of open source consumers of packages. We can actually, even if a registry doesn't have download stats, we can use the number of open source projects that depend upon a package as a good proxy. It's quite closely aligned with the number of downloads. That can actually help to be able to find like what are the most used packages, even if we don't have downloads available for that particular ecosystem. So Go is a really good example, or Java. Both of those registries don't provide any kind of download stats, so it'd be difficult to say like which is the most downloaded package, but we can use most depended upon packages as a proxy for that. And how I come to this measure of is a package critical is basically saying, if I sum up all of the usage within a particular package manager registry, starting from the most used package, once I get to 80% of all usage for that registry, then stop. So work my way through from the top, going, this one is the most critical. And once I reach 80%, often that's kind of like a few hundred to 1,000 packages, that basically, I've got a visualization for this. I forget the number of packages that you have ends up being a very small percentage that actually makes up that 80% of usage. It's basically the critical packages within an ecosystem, but also overall for all ecosystems, is the 1% of the 1%. It's a very small number. Hopefully you can see that tiny green square in the corner up there, or if you can see my mouse, I'm not sure if if Zoom shows mouses in screen shares. That green square makes up 80% of all of the usage of these open source projects. So it's a massive power law there of the critical packages are like so much more significant in their effect on the shape of the ecosystem, and also the kind of the state of the security, and the state of like how well are these things funded and supported, can have a massive knock-on effect for the rest of the ecosystem, because they are just so much more used than everything else. In terms of how many of these critical packages have some kind of funding link, it's about 28%, which compared to the 3% of overall is much better, but is also still, that's like for 10,000 packages is still, a slightly disappointing number. You would hope that we would be able to kind of encourage a lot of projects to get, if they are the most critical in their ecosystem, that they should have some way to be like offer financial support. But we'll see that there's some interesting things start to show up as we go looking at what these critical packages look like. And there's also an interesting stat here that the average number of funding links for these critical packages is 2. So that means that they have multiple different places. If they have a funding link, they are able to receive donations to multiple different platforms. Often it's Open Collective and GitHub sponsors, but it could be a combination of different things. There's about 1,400 packages that do have more than one funding link, which is an interesting statistic there. If we look at the funding domains, which is basically the different platforms and places that receive the most usage within critical packages, within those 2,700 or whatever it was. Again, GitHub sponsors comes out on top. Open Collective again second. Tidelift shows up here. Tidelift doesn't actually really exist anymore. It's been bought by another company, and you can't actually find the tidelift.com domain. Doesn't go anywhere. But I believe they currently still pay out to projects. Remains to be seen how long that will continue. But other than that, like primarily looking at, again, Syndra showing up here as being, his domain is again one of the most used funding platforms for open source, because he has so many open source packages. And if we again look at how this is broken down by registry, then we start to see like which registries have really taken kind of like critical package funding seriously. NPM and packages, like that's 50% of their critical packages have some kind of funding platform there, which is like an excellent level of coverage. And there's a interesting breakdown as you go down there for the kind of different sizes. Is also can run into some problems around like the metadata that is available in certain registries, and how well you can jump from the individual package to the source repository, especially with things like Java is traditionally like just has much poorer metadata for being able to make those connections. But also you notice at the top, kind of 4 out of 5 all have the feature of being able to declare your funding link in your package metadata directly. You don't have to go off and find where the source repository is being developed to be able to find out how to fund those packages. Let's go a little bit deeper into how some of this data looks. So the 2 platforms that we're going to look at are Open Collective and GitHub sponsors, because both of those have at least some level of transparency in the amount of data that we can collect and look at. And Open Collective is very open and very transparent. So we can see there's of the number of unique collectives that are linked to from critical packages, 150. Not massive, but actually see that the average collective has actually like 5 critical packages published from it. So there's quite a concentration of the number of packages that are being supported from each individual collective. And we actually get to see, like the actual amounts that are coming into Open Collective and how much has been spent. On average, the transactions are spending $90 is like an interesting thing. There's definitely more spelunking you could do there to go and look at the kinds of transactions and the things that money is being spent on. There's also an interesting thing there with like how much money there is currently sat in these collectives, $2.4 million that has not been spent. There are definitely some collectives that have collected a good amount of donations that are not actively doing anything with that money. And so it's just kind of sat there waiting rather than being activated and actually spent on maintenance of the project, or potentially they could use that to support their dependencies as well. There's a lot of very specific data there that's not necessarily the most interesting to talk about, especially as I've still got a few slides to get through, but interesting kind of levels of sizes of donations. And this is where there are some really big chunky donations that have been given to some Open Collective projects, rather than lots of small ones. As you see, the biggest is $1.6 million. I believe that was a Google donation to a web focused project. Yep, there we go. Webpack has a significant amount of that total amount of money that has been donated. And again, the power law shows up here in terms of the kind of breakdown of where money goes to across these collectives, because this is the top 10, and it quickly falls off. There, at the time of making this presentation, there were 2 collectives that were pointed to by these critical packages that had never received a donation, which is very sad. And I have not gone back and checked since I put this presentation together, but I did put out a call to say like, oh, like here are these donation like places that haven't received any donations. And I believe that some people have definitely gone and reached out to those collectives to try and bolster them a little bit, because no donation is a kind of a sad state when it's one of these packages could be very heavily used. Let's have a look at GitHub sponsors data. Unfortunately, we don't get any dollar amounts this time, but we are able to see how many individual sponsors are sponsoring these critical packages. So we have 667 different GitHub sponsors accounts that are linked to from these critical packages. Again, we end up with a kind of interesting average here. The maximum is, again, Syndra has 190 critical packages in the JavaScript world that all have his funding link on there. But on average, 95% of all of the GitHub sponsors accounts are a lot less number of packages than that. So he really drags those numbers around a little bit. There are also an interesting kind of breakdown of accounts in GitHub sponsors that don't have any sponsors or don't have any active sponsors. So previously had some sponsorship, but have then dropped off. Again, getting that kind of time series data out of GitHub sponsors is difficult. You basically need to be watching it on an ongoing basis, because their APIs won't tell you from a public point of view unless you get like you can get time series data out from your own GitHub sponsors accounts. You can't get it for like public other public data from other GitHub sponsors. I reached out to GitHub sponsors whilst working on some of this data for the presentation, and they did not want to share any monetary values. And basically, like, the project is kind of very small amount of maintenance on it in terms of actual feature development right now. So they weren't going to build anything for me to be able to mine this more effectively. If we have a look at the breakdown here Whereas Open Collective is all basically always a kind of a group, a collective of people. GitHub sponsors actually can be an individual or they can be an organization. Uh, there's a fun thing you run into here is that some packages will link to a GitHub sponsors account that isn't actually on GitHub sponsors. Now, sometimes that is because they used to be on GitHub sponsors and have left. And sometimes that is that some automated system put their username into a place, maybe in the funding YAML file, and they never had actually signed up to GitHub sponsors, but they're potentially missing out on quite a lot of exposure in terms of saying like, oh yeah, I could receive some of these things. There's also challenges in terms of what country you're in, to if GitHub sponsors actually will allow you to be approved. So some people might have committed it thinking like, oh, I'm in the process of enabling my GitHub sponsors account, but then I could never get, fully accepted because of country that I'm in. But we're looking at mostly users. So there's a small number of organizations that are supporting these in terms of the GitHub sponsors, but primarily GitHub sponsors is for these critical packages is individuals. If we have a look at the GitHub sponsors accounts with the most active sponsors, these numbers are really disappointing, right? This is some of the most supported people across all of open source in terms of the kind of like the visible financial data we can see on GitHub, and how much GitHub has the ability to leverage GitHub sponsors in putting it into kind of people's workflows. And you're looking at kind of like 1 to 200 active sponsors on some of these accounts compared to the millions of users on GitHub is absolutely tiny. And obviously we don't know the exact amounts here, but if you took the kind of total amount that GitHub has said it's received from GitHub sponsors and divided it by the number of approximate sponsorships that we've ever seen, then you might be kind of like maybe $10 on average for a user donation, and maybe $1,000 for an organization donation is still not a huge amount of money compared to kind of at least the visible funding data that we see in Open Collective, but we don't know directly. But still, these numbers look really small for me for the amount of active sponsors. And then if we look at the data over all time, it changes a little bit, and you can see some accounts have appeared that weren't kind of being actively sponsored, where people have dropped off and no longer sponsoring those things. But still a very small amount, really, relative to kind of the amount of how much these projects get used. And the total breakdown there is, 20,000 users and only 1,400 in terms of who has sponsored those critical packages. So I keep running into this terminology of like sponsored versus sponsor. Who is giving who? Like they use the same word for everything, so it's kind of tricky to. I haven't found a good way to describe that, but this is the breakdown of who is giving money to those critical projects that are on GitHub sponsors. And lastly, let's look at who some of these owners are. In terms of the critical packages, where their source repositories are, like, are they owned by a user or are they owned by an organization? So we have about nearly 10,000 packages total, which come from 6,000 unique repositories, which are owned by nearly 3,000 unique owners. So there's a lot of grouping that's happening there. It's not just that there are 10,000 packages and 10,000 unique maintainers behind them. And if we look down at the breakdown of who is owning those things, it's actually a lot more organizations. So that starts to kind of look quite interesting in terms of, we saw that there was a good kind of, in some places, 50% of coverage of number of projects that had funding links. But if there are 65% of these are organizations. Maybe they actually don't want to be able to accept donations. They're actually kind of like, oh, we support this project through donations of time, and or this project is just like the AWS Ruby gems are just part of the AWS project, and they don't need or want donations because they're just doing whatever they like with them to support their business. If we look at the number of unique owners, we can see that the kind of number of uniques between organizations and users is actually very similar. So there's an interesting breakdown there as well. And if we look at the actual top number of organizations behind these critical packages, we have AWS as number one. There's at least 3 organizations related to Google that show up in that list. So it then starts to kind of highlight the fact that actually there is a lot of for-profit companies that are in control of some of these most critical packages. And so the funding story then gets interesting there because, it's not so clear that you can go and see them on Open Collective because Google doesn't need to receive donations for its packages, and neither does Amazon. If we look at individual users, we see some interesting breakdown here. Again, there is Syndra showing up with 181 packages, which is like 2% of all these critical packages, which is pretty wild. But these individuals are often maintaining a lot of packages. This isn't just like one person per package. You're looking at 20 plus packages per user here. And again, the number of unique owners with funding links is still kind of small, but also surprising number of organizations there. And I think that is partly due to the way that GitHub encourages there's certain features that are only available if your repositories are managed by an org to be able to have multiple admins compared to users. So a lot of projects will get pushed into an organization, even if the organization is really only controlled by one person, so that they get those extra features. And if we have a look at how those orgs are broken down, again, they have a lot of packages here rather than being kind of like evenly spread out. There's a big collection of kind of, if you have a few popular packages, you can end up kind of getting more and more, especially as you extract and kind of make dependency trees where your low-level packages get pulled along by your more popular packages that are like, I didn't delve into for this presentation, but potentially some of these packages may be indirectly popular rather than actually being declared as direct dependencies of applications. And again, if we look at the users, we can see that I feel like I've already included this slide, that again, the total number of packages here per most popular user is still significant. If we look at for the users there, like, do they belong to a company is an interesting way of seeing that. And again, Google shows up here. Also noted Grok with a Q is not Grok with a K, the XAI kind of Elon AI chatbot thing. It's a different company that is related to AI, but not quite the same. But there's it's interesting to see how many of these users work at some pretty big, well-funded companies as well. But they're maintaining projects that they're on their own personal accounts. So, quick summary. 35% of critical packages are kind of owned, and they belong within individual maintainers' accounts, not organizations. So that's like a significant chunk are individuals. Only 27% of all critical packages have any kind of like funding link. So that means that 27% of them have no obvious way of financially supporting them. There's definitely some unobvious ways that I have not delved into here. But you can also see like a big concentration of that well-funded maintainers can afford to kind of maintain multiple projects and kind of then have a nice effect of being able to continue to publish and maintain more of them. There's also the potential for some gamification. I didn't really go into this in too much detail, but if you have some popular packages, you can potentially then make more packages as dependencies of those things that then suddenly are massively downloaded and show up in lots of kind of automated funding tools like GitHub sponsors and Tidelift. So there's the potential that some of these people have found ways of splitting their projects into small packages to be able to collect more sponsorship as being like multiple different unique entities, which is a interesting area of further research to look at. Loads of things that this group is probably thinking about all the time that I didn't get to fit into this talk, but thinking about which of these projects belongs to foundations. Like, can we find more information on grants that have been given? Can we look at like which of those projects actively have people working on them and contributing to them? Like there's definitely some that don't have any activity going on, but maybe are also receiving donations. And then also being able to kind of delve more deeply into which of these things are, like, in terms of dependencies, actually direct dependencies of heavily used things, or are they being pulled in to the critical class by being a dependency of something else that is popular? So, pop quiz for anyone who hasn't already seen this. How many times was Syndra mentioned in this talk in slides? Does anyone have a guess they would like to make?
Can we give a range?
Oh, I want a number.
And we've got some guesses coming in chat.
Oh, okay. Let me just open my chat window there. Right, I'll give you the ranges is
Kaylin, your
invalid input on the range there.
Yeah, I feel like you've gamified it, Killian. Yeah.
I don't think anyone has got it exactly. The answer is 7. Here are all the different places that Syndra was mentioned in this talk. Like, he shows up absolutely everywhere when you go looking at this funding data, because he has so many packages and so many like funding links that are just absolutely everywhere. And his account on GitHub sponsors and Open Collective are in some of the most well-funded and most popular, because he has so much exposure in terms of like all of his individual packages that get downloaded everywhere. Here are some of the links to places in ecosystems where I've pulled some of this data from. No one won. You definitely can't. This is not The Price is Right, and you can't go up to without going over. So these are kind of pages you could click around and see, like, what are the critical packages, where are the funding breakdowns for different ecosystems, and then Open Collective and sponsors are the two kind of services that actually mine the data from Open Collective and GitHub sponsors. And here are my details, and the slides I've also already added them to the working group notes. That was a lot of data. But I think I have time for a couple of questions, maybe.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. That's fantastic. I've got a couple of questions, but I think I'll open it up to the chat first if anyone wants to jump in. And just to quickly say, we'll also move our feedback session to the 5th. So just so people know we've got time. Anyone got any questions? If not, then I might jump in if that's all right. Or Killian, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think we've been raising our virtual hands. I'll start. Thank you so much, Andrew. This is really phenomenal work you've done, really phenomenal data that we have, thanks to you. I just have a very specific question about the GitHub sponsors data. So I was actually quite surprised by this finding that packages have very few sponsors. I wanted to know, I was curious to know, if you know if sponsors equals individuals plus organizations, or if they provide kind of more specific information about what equates to a sponsor.
So when I say sponsor, I mean it could be either an organization or a user. Um, I have broken it down here in like this is the sponsors service that does the indexing of GitHub sponsors, so you can kind of see like who the biggest, most funded maintainers and most active sponsors of accounts are. Again, the word sponsors is used in a lot of different ways here, but yeah, it's like nearly 10x number of sorry, more than 10x number of users versus number of organizations, but in all of those kind of counts of how many sponsorships, I combine them together.
Okay, thanks. Yeah,
But just sorry, can I just clarify one piece of what you just said? So this is when GitHub, what GitHub calls those accounts is an organization or a user. But I can create an organization called, my favorite NPM app and have a bunch of repositories under that, and I'm an organization, even though I
Yes,
might have created that as an individual. Is that correct?
that is correct. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm just using that Boolean of like, is this an organization in terms of GitHub's API, which occasionally will have some extra features in the metadata response. But the primary thing being that there can be multiple people that are under the umbrella of an organization, um, rather than individual users. And for companies, they're basically unable to function as a user account on GitHub because they can't like let multiple people do stuff. Like you can contribute, you can be added as collaborators, but you can't then go and admin anything in that account, and you don't get any of the features of like being able to manage multiple people. So I tend towards saying that an organization is closer to a company than like an individual user that has an umbrella, but there definitely those things exist, and I've not broken it down here. There's also kind of like looking at GitHub sponsors, a number of accounts on GitHub sponsors that are very, very popular. Notice top 10,000 is as much as I can get through the API, unfortunately. It just tops out there. But this account basically selling stuff through GitHub sponsors. There's a lot of people who sell Discord stickers or access to a Slack channel through GitHub sponsors. It's not just straight up kind of maintenance grants and donations. There's some interesting behaviors that happen when people realize that the fees of selling things through GitHub sponsors is much cheaper than selling things via Shopify or other platforms. So it can be an effective way of selling access to digital goods through receiving a sponsorship on GitHub sponsors, even if it's just a one-time thing. Next question.
Oh, did we just lose Alexandros?
Yeah,
Alexandros still with us? Yep.
I might jump in if that's okay. I really liked these insights, especially this last one. I had never thought about. I was pretty impressed by that. So I have this one question. So like, what is the frequency you're crawling the data from the different package managers, PyPy, for example? So how often do you do that? So how up to date are your data on ecosystems?
Oh, good question. So I try to index every single package and double check on it within 1 month, which seems like not a lot, but I'm also watching for every new version that is published. So anytime that a new version is published, then it's like, okay, I've seen that feed come in, and I'm checking that RSS feed for where there are RSS feeds. It's different for different registries. Uh, every few seconds to be able to spot whenever there's a new version, and then that version will trigger the sync of a package. I'm also then more proactively syncing critical packages, and actually basically the top 10% of all packages on. I aim to be like synced within 1 week for the high level metadata again, trying to get those versions within minutes of them being published. And then I'm also using signals from, say, like if the source repository has seen some activity, a release or a tag, or even just a push to master, then I will also trigger a sync on the package to be like, oh, maybe they've published a new version and I've not seen it. Obviously, some package managers don't have any kind of way of getting a feed. So it's very much like kind of a trawl of best case where possible, but for anything that shows up as being more interesting, then it's proactively trying to do it. Like I'm basically every day for those top 10,000 packages is being double checked.
Okay, really interesting. Maybe one thing I didn't know that might be interesting in this working group. I did also some research regarding metadata of packages, particularly for the Python ecosystem. So if that's fine, I would drop it in here, and maybe we had this point before. I would volunteer to present that in 2 weeks. I didn't know that this kind of research might be of interest, so I would be volunteering to offer that.
Yeah, fantastic, Alexandros. That'd be great. Yeah, we'll sign you up. What we usually do is kind of, we also have a research slide series, and there's a given format for that. And you can find it on the repo, but I can also share it with you if you're on our Slack. That also works.
Yeah.
That'd be cool. Cool.
Yeah.
We're pretty much at time. So I think I'll wrap it up here and just say another heartfelt thank you to Andrew for joining us. Apologies if there's a sound of a siren in the background. Before we go, just a couple of quick reminders. We'll move our feedback session to November 5th, which Killian will lead. On November 19th, Adrian will present some findings from measuring the impact of NGI funding, which should be really interesting. And a couple of reminders about some upcoming events. There's the Digital Resilience Forum in Madrid on October 29th. This is organized by Daniel at Bitergio. Should be really interesting. I know STA and a few others are going to be there. There's also Osprology in Lyon in France on November 5th and 6th. And lastly, FOSS Backstage in March 16th and 17th in Berlin. Important reminder there because the CFP closes next Wednesday, October 27th. Killian, I'm seeing a hand raised.
Yeah, just before we jump off, I just want to say I've noticed that there are a few new members today, and we haven't had a chance to, give you the mic to introduce yourselves. But please come along next time, and we'd love to hear from you about what your interests are and your background, and get to know each other. So thanks for coming.
There's a man doing his community management. Beautiful. Lovely. Okay, then hopefully see everyone on November 5th. Take care in between time. All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.